For years after this bunker kidnapping, this victim kept her identity a secret, but she is now ready to tell her story. When a date with a doctor turned into this nightmare kidnapping, this victim was told that she was going to be his girlfriend and that she was going to stay locked in that bunker for years to come. This is the story of how she endured that trauma, how she escaped, and why she went back. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Mckenna, but today's case is a survival story, and it is one that I have not seen many people talk about. The victim herself did not talk about it for many years until she actually came out with a documentary called The Bunker, which I will link everything down below, because she does reflect on that time and what it has really been like since this man was caught and arrested and then, spoiler alert, released. So we will get into all of that. It is crazy. This happened over in Sweden, so I think that's why I've never heard about it. So maybe a lot of you guys have not heard about it either, and that's really why I wanted to speak about it. First, a quick mention for our sponsor, Skillshare. I know a lot of us this time of year are wanting to better ourselves, reach our goals, but sometimes it's really hard to figure out actionable steps to do so. And with Skillshare, they have an online learning community with all sorts of topics and categories that breaks down these skills into bite-sized videos, or you could do stackable lessons so that basically no matter your skill level, you can learn at your own pace. The layout gives me so much less overwhelm and makes me feel like it is doable with my schedule. They have topics on marketing, entrepreneurship, productivity, and so much more. I really want to allow my creative side to grow this year because we make time for work. We sometimes make time for even hobbies, but what about creativity? I feel like as I've gotten older, it's harder and harder to find time to be creative. So I really wanted to start by making my editing more creative, and Skillshare actually has a lot of different videos on Final Cut Pro, which is what I use. So I've actually been watching the visual storytelling by Andrew Gormley, and I love it. So if you want to be able to break down your goals with some actionable learning, Skillshare is actually giving the first 500 of you to click the link in my description a 1-month free trial. So go ahead and get started with my link down below today. Now let's get back to the story. It was 2015 in Sweden, and Isabel Eriksson was 30 years old at the time. She was known to be very strong-willed. She was a hard worker. She had a vision for the future. And Isabella would speak about her childhood in her book called You Are Mine, which I will have linked below. She had grown up in a very small town in Gothenburg, Sweden. She had 2 parents and a big sister. Isabella described her childhood as wonderful and happy. She was more of a shy child. At first, she wore these big glasses, and those glasses were actually the first thing to go when she became a little bit older and was figuring out the woman that she wanted to be. She wanted to be a makeup artist and then an astronaut and then a dog trainer. And one of her role models was actually Paris Hilton. She dreamed of this luxurious life like Paris, but one of her biggest passions was actually animals. She adored horses, and she went to high school to get a job with animals, but she quickly realized that this wasn't as luxurious as she had hoped, and so with 6 months left of high school, she actually dropped out. Isabel then began to work at a cafe. She was working there constantly, but again, this was not the life she wanted either. She wasn't making good money for her liking, so like many in their late teens, early 20s, she was not sure where life was actually going to take her. At 19, she ended up meeting this man that she would backpack across the world with. She landed in Melbourne, Australia, and she loved this adventure, but she also did not want to stay in the hostels and barely be making it day by day. So she decided she was going to make money, and this is when she found an ad for a gentleman's club with the promise of this good money. Isabel was not ignorant to what this job entailed. She was actually always very open sexually. She felt, in her own words, empowered to be able to use her beauty and sexuality to make lots of money. Isabel would go give these private dances and realize that it paid really well. So she would actually work there until her visa expired and she had to return to Sweden. At 23 years old, though, she had gone back to Melbourne. She actually loved it there. She loved the city. So she went back to her job at the Gentlemen's Club. And at that point, she could afford these higher end hotels rather than staying at hostels. And at one of these hotels, Isabel would actually meet a woman who looked like the embodiment embodiment of what Isabel wanted for her future. She was elegant, put together, confident. She appeared wealthy. And so Isabel decided to talk to this woman. And that is when this woman would introduce her to the world of escorting. Now, she made this job sound very luxurious, with wealthy clients and expensive meals and gifts, and being able to travel around the world. She was saying that she made more money in a few hours than Isabel was making all night at the gentlemen's club. And so Isabel was very intrigued, and this woman then offered to introduce Isabel to some of her repeat clients. So this is when Isabel began working as an escort herself. She was having this high-end business where she was getting about 2,000 pounds a night. So she was making this good money, but she was also keeping her job a secret from anyone who knew her. Her friends and family believed that she was a makeup artist, but meanwhile, she was traveling often for her clients and for pleasure. She would say that she felt safe at this point because she was always in control. She had this intuition to read people and to be prepared for any situation. And so because of this, she only ever had one bad experience, being an escort, which is what we're going to talk about today. Isabel was working hard for her dream life, and in her 20s, she actually landed herself at the Cannes Film Festival, where she would meet her idol, Paris Hilton, and Leonardo DiCaprio as well. Around 2015, Isabel had traveled to America. She had decided that she wanted to go to school, and she was going to do so in California. She planned to take a few more clients to pay for some classes, and then she really wanted to move on to a different career. She had also gotten a little dog, a little poodle named Nellie at this time. She was really settling down in her life. But on that September 10th, 2015, Isabel had a client booked for a date in Stockholm, and this is where she was living at the time. So this was around actually 5 hours from her hometown of Gothenburg, but she had gotten a call one day from one of her advertisements, and she thought he sounded like a very normal guy. That Thursday night, they were going to meet up at her place, and Isabella was met with a very wealthy, calm, well put together, intelligent man. And her first impression of him was a good one. He told her that he was a 38-year-old American stock trader named Martin, and Isabel kind of clocked the fact that his American accent was quite strange, but he also told her he had been living in London for quite a while, so she thought that this could have been why. He had brought her presents, which was a bottle of perfume and white and pink flowers that he claimed to have picked himself. And so almost immediately after meeting Isabel and having some conversation, he would ask her on a second date for that Saturday, so just 2 days later. He claimed he had a work function that he wanted to bring her to. All of his coworkers were bringing their wives and girlfriends, so he did not want to be alone. And so Isabel agreed, as she would be paid for this second date. And Isabel noticed that he had a very intense gaze at some points when he was looking at her, but she had this odd feeling and she pushed it away because he did still seem nice. So on Saturday, September 12th, Martin would arrive at her home with champagne, orange juice, and chocolate-covered strawberries. He told Isabel that they could relax at her home and have a good time, eat a little something prior to going to the party, but they would never make it to the party. Isabel Eriksson would go missing after this. And the next thing she knew, she was waking up in a room she did not recognize. Her mouth was dry. She was slowly opening her eyes, dazed and confused. And she was lying on some sort of bed, wearing jeans and a pink sweater that she had not previously been in. She was also not wearing any underwear. She would suddenly realize she was not alone. Her dog Nellie was actually whimpering next to her, trying to wake her up by licking her face. Nellie appeared to be terrified, and Isabel was coming to, and she was also becoming more and more horrified because she realized she had an IV in her arm. She immediately ripped it out, and that's when she would hear a voice coming from inside the room. A male voice said, "It would have been better if I'd taken it out. I'm a doctor after all." Isabella quickly realized that the client that she had been with had now taken her hostage, and she had no idea where she was. Within the next few hours, Isabel would find that she was in what appeared to be a bunker with a huge door that was heavy and as sturdy as a bank vault with a lock on it. There was a bed in this room where she was forced to stay. There was also a kitchen bench and a toilet and stone floors, but everything was a bit dirty. It smelled bad. It was cold. It was almost like a construction site. There was concrete bags and materials all around, and the sound of the refrigerator was all she could hear. When her captor would leave this bunker, Isabel would try different codes on the pad to the doors, but it never worked. And when her captor returned, she would hear him opening a series of locks to get inside. And she believed that there was actually 3 doors she would have to get through to escape. So on the first day, as he came back inside, Isabel had actually found a pair of screws that she tried to attack him with, aiming for his carotid artery. Instead, he was able to wrestle the object away from her and get her to the ground. She quickly realized there was no chance of overpowering this man, and he told her if she continued to rebel, he would extend her captivity and feed her only crisp bread. On the second day, he brought breakfast for Isabel, and she decided she didn't want him to view her as a threat, especially because she had tried to attack him. So she began to smile, and she was talking to him, and she was saying, if you let me go, I won't tell anybody. But he refused. Instead, he said that she would start to like him in time. And she was then asked if she had any requests on things such as the color of the walls in the bunker, because he wasn't done fixing it up. He then handed her a paper to write down food, like a grocery list that she wanted, and he would go and get for her. She made sure that coffee was written on the list because she wanted to be able to stay awake. This man also began to mention that he was going to get her a computer without internet, obviously, so that she could have something to do in the bunker. He also then handed her some books, 3 books that she could read to feel at home. But these books were actually called Dirt and the Devil's Company, and they were about women being raped and murdered. Meanwhile, one of Isabella's friends had actually called her mother, Christina, saying that she could not get a hold of Isabel. This had been 4 days since she had last been heard from, and police investigator Bernie Dalquist learned about this case. And so they went and they searched Isabel's apartment. They found these 2 champagne glasses as well as a bowl of strawberries. There was also a dress on the floor by the bed, but it didn't have any sort of rip marks or stains or anything like that. This did not appear to be the scene of a struggle in this apartment, except for the fact that the sheets on the bed were missing. In the kitchen, they did find a condom wrapper, but just the outer packaging. And so investigators began tracking her phone as well as her bank accounts, even looking at local hospitals for any sign of her. They went to places that she had frequented, such as the Nordic Wellness Gym, but they hadn't seen her there either. Her mother, Christina, was determined to find her daughter alive. She began creating and handing out these missing persons posters, and one of Isabel's friends then took police to all the places that Isabel could be and confirmed that she believed something was very wrong. This friend would also be the one to tell police that Isabel had a client that night that she welcomed into her home that was allegedly American, and that's when investigators realized what Isabel did for a living. So forensics would enter her apartment, and they would find that the chocolate-covered strawberries in her home had been laced with a date rape drug. She was also found to have plans with a police officer that she was friends with that Tuesday that she had never made it to. They knew at this point foul play was involved. Back in the bunker, the captor was showing Isabel a video of what the bunker was going to be and a door she had not yet been in. And he would explain that this would lead to what would eventually be a torture chamber. He then began to take DNA swabs, vaginal swabs, telling her that he wanted to make sure she didn't have any STDs because he wanted to have unprotected sex. He said that if she got pregnant, he didn't really care since he was a doctor. This man would be gone in the daytime and come back in the evenings. But if Isabel didn't do exactly what he told her to, she was told he was going to kidnap her mother. So Isabel would work out and pace around the bunker to pass the time. And when Isabel told him that there were people looking for her and that they were not going to give up finding her, he said that no one was going to find where she was. But one day, Isabel actually heard voices coming from outside of the bunker, so she began to scream for help. And the door finally opened, and there was a different man looking at her. She began to tell him exactly what happened, that she had been kidnapped, that he needed to help her. And that's when this man then pulled his hair and pulled off a realistic rubber mask off of his face. And her captor then smiled back at her. Isabel's first time out of the bunker in days was when Nellie needed to go to the bathroom. She had been using the bathroom on the ground because the captor wasn't taking her outside. So Isabel asked if she could go, and she was handcuffed to go outside. That's when she realized that there was this small hallway that led to the door. And as soon as they were outside, she saw this tall fence making escape pretty much impossible. But she was able to see past that fence into the forest, and she believed that that forest was a Swedish forest, that they were still in Sweden. He then began to tell Isabel that he was going to keep her for a few years, and that he was also going to bring more women into the bunker. He even mentioned possible celebrities he was going to kidnap, like Marie Schoenholt and Zara Larsson. Isabel knew at that moment that she wouldn't last there for years, that she would either have to kill him or he was going to kill her. Then one day, the captor allowed Isabel to go into his home for a shower. He wanted her to be clean because he demanded that they were going to have sex 2 to 3 times a day. This time, he handcuffed himself and Isabel together and led her outside, keeping his eyes on her the whole time. And that is when they went into this bathroom. He was also in the bathroom with her. She was looking at this window that was in the bathroom, and he said, "You can't escape. It's double glass." She would say that intense gaze that had at first made her uneasy would come back, and it would overwhelm her. He would just stare at her, and she believed that those were the eyes of a psychopath. When this captor began to ask Isabel to cook for him and that they would eat together, and then he was confiding in her that he was never really good with women and girls were always leaving him, she began to realize that he wanted a girlfriend. But at the same time, his mood would change so much that she never really knew what he was thinking or what he wanted in order to manipulate him into letting her go. Then one day, this captor would enter the bunker with a gun, and Isabel was terrified that that was going to be the last day she had on Earth. But then the captor would hand her the gun. He would tell her she just had to shoot him and she would be free, that the door was unlocked. But she didn't have any idea where she was. She began shaking and crying, and she ended up handing the gun back to him. At this point, he began to trust her a little bit more, and he told her that he wanted to sleep next to her, not just with her. And so during the night, when Isabel had to lay next to the man who was holding her hostage, she tried to roll over, and he ended up grabbing her shoulder and holding her down to keep her from moving. She felt like he was always watching. But that night, he had told her about the many women that didn't want him. And that's when Isabel began to realize what she needed to do to survive. She could pretend that she was interested in him. She had done this a lot as an escort, and so she was going to be the perfect girlfriend. She would just pretend. She would ask him then if he would get some stuff from her apartment so that she could stay longer. And so he agreed to, and he left. But when he returned, he had the two of them sit across from each other, and he gave her an envelope with a key to the bunker. Again, he handed her a gun and told her to shoot him. She thought he was going to shoot her. But again, she did not shoot at him, and so she gained even more of his trust. At that point, they began to come up with a story as to where Isabel had been this whole time she was missing. Isabel was confused, but the next day on September 18th, Isabel was taken out of the bunker and into the car for the first time since she was kidnapped. She had no idea how long this had been, but she was then taken down to the police station, where her captor began to tell investigators that she was staying with him voluntarily. She was not a missing person. She showed them her ID and asked for the keys to her apartment. She was told to wait for a detective to come and talk to her, and so they actually had to wait in the waiting room for 2 hours, and that is when Isabel was taken inside on her own. The detective noticed that she did look back at Martin before coming with him, and she asked if Martin was coming too, but the detective asked him to stay in the waiting room. So once they got back, Isabel almost immediately broke down and told the police the truth, saying, "He told me I could scream as loud as I want and no one would hear me." Isabel would tell the police that Martin had come to her apartment. They drank champagne, they ate strawberries, and then they went to her bedroom, and she was feeling a bit out of it and didn't know why, because she'd only drank half a glass of champagne. He told her to lay on his chest before they went to dinner, and that's when she said she woke up in the bunker. She said, "I didn't know what would happen, whether he would torture me, kill me, or rape me. He just told me he would keep me there for a few years, then release me." She then admitted to them that the man who was with her was her captor, and he was armed. While arresting this man, investigators rushed to the scene to verify this story. This bunker was found to be in Kristianstad, Sweden, about 350 miles from Isabel's home in Stockholm. It had been built at a farm, which was one of the 3 houses on this very remote road. But the actual bunker was inside what was appeared to be a shed. And there was this initial door with a lock, and then a door with a combination lock, and then the last door which had to have a key to open. There were also 5 extra locks on this door. Neighbors around this area would say that the owner of this home came by and said hello to them every single day. He did not appear strange. He was described as sweet, and that is when this man was identified as Dr. Martin Trenneborg. His childhood best friend said he was extremely smart. He even wrote and spoke in another language. He was very goal-oriented. He wanted to be the best at everything. He had trained to be a paratrooper in the military, but ended up being a mountain rifleman instead. He then went on to study medicine at the Karolinska Institute, and he started working at a medical center after school. There, his coworkers said he was well-liked, he was calm, he was competent. He would work as a doctor for 3 days a week and told his coworkers that the other 2 days were for working on his home. Little did they know that meant that he was building a bunker to hold hostages. But during his first interrogation, Martin would tell the police that he would try really hard to make Isabel happy, and that he was trying to be the opposite of cruel. When they asked him why he chose her, he said that he found her ad and she was much different than other escorts, that she had written about a girlfriend experience and that she didn't want it to feel like it was a paid date. He said after meeting her once, her personality was much different than most women, and that she appeared to have an especially messed up childhood, and he wanted to save her. Martin said that there were 3 ways that he could have gone about kidnapping her. That the easiest way was purely technical, which was the guerrilla method, or violence, which could have been a club to the head, or a threat of violence, which could have been a gun to the head, then tie the person and throw them in a boat. That's the example he gave. Or there was the cunning method, which was without threat of violence or violence itself. He said that he went into her apartment, paid her, they had sex, and then he asked her out again for Saturday. And that day, on Saturday, he didn't think about anything but kidnapping her. He said that night before, he had prepared everything, including getting a Norwegian-style license plates and flags. He then brought everything to Isabel's apartment except for the wheelchair that he was going to use on her. He said he would dip the strawberries in chocolate after he injected it with the drug, and he fed it to Isabel. He also marked which strawberries were drugged with a permanent marker on the leaves so to make sure that he didn't eat any. While she was sedated, Martin confessed to setting her up with an IV in order to leave the apartment. He then took off her underwear and put a nappy or a diaper on her, then carried her down the stairs to the wheelchair and put her in the car, and then went back for his suitcase, the sheets on the bed, and her dog. He then took her phone, he turned it off, and he drove them to his home, and anytime she would start to wake up, he would inject more sedatives into her IV. Martin confessed that on September 13th, they made it to the farm, and he began to speak to Isabel in Swedish, which was to confuse her even more because he had been speaking in English. She was half conscious, and he asked her to unbutton her pants so he could remove her diaper. He admitted that she was understandably not happy to be in the bunker, but he said that once he bought this property of this farm, he started to not leave his home. He was becoming reclusive. He said he almost had an allergy to people and that the kidnapping was going to be a solution to his problem. So he was going to kidnap these women and lock them up to be his girlfriend. Now, he had kept Isabel for 6 days, and he confessed that by the end of this week, he began to think of what everyone would think about this, and he wanted to just end it all. It got worse when he went to Isabel's apartment, and he actually saw the missing persons posters of her. He noticed that the lock was changed, and that is when he began to panic. And so that's when he went back to the bunker. He gave the gun to Isabel, and he said he didn't actually believe that she would ever shoot him. It was just another manipulation tactic, a test. But before he took her to the police that day, he actually took her to a restaurant to test her yet again. He left her alone to see if she would run away or say anything, and she knew he had a gun, so she didn't. He then had her drive them to the police station. So on September 18th, 6 days since the kidnapping, Martin said that he took Isabel to the Stockholm police station to show the police that she was fine, she was with him voluntarily, and to get new keys to her place. But when Isabel told the truth, he was arrested. And during his interrogation, he would talk about 5 operations that he had malformation of his urethra, which they operated on right after high school. He said that this was so crushing to his confidence and it made him want to take his life. And this is when they believed that they really got it out of him what had turned him into this sort of monster. Isabel even remembered that there was a deformity on his private area that he did not want to talk about. But when Martin was asked what he saw when he looked in the mirror, he said a total failure and a worthless person. He also said, though, that he could have left Isabel in the bunker and took his own life where she would never get out, but he didn't. Now, the chief prosecutor, Peter Claesson, said this man is charged with drugging a woman in Stockholm. He has had sexual intercourse with her while she was unconscious or slept and abducted her to his residence outside of Kristianstad. The man has told us he intended the woman to become his girlfriend, and she was to stay there for several years. Now, the indictment actually said the defendant built what was meant to look like a machine shed next to his countryside home, and inside it was this concrete bunker with double metal doors. The purpose was to keep people incarcerated during extended periods of time without detection. Martin's lawyer, though, was claiming that he was just a very sad and depressed person who wanted a partner, and he deeply regretted what had happened because he never meant to hurt anyone. In January 2016, Dr. Martin Trenneborg went on trial, and Martin confessed to the kidnapping but refused to confess to the while she was unconscious. Prosecutors claim that after drugging Isabel, he used 2 rubber masks that were very realistic looking, one of a bearded man and one of an older lady, to conceal his and Isabel's identities to get her out of the apartment. He then placed her in a wheelchair and took her to his car before driving 350 miles to his home. They claimed he planned to hold her prisoner there for years in a specifically constructed soundproofed bunker. His defense even said there was no simple explanation for this, that he was a high-performing person who was unwell psychologically and was longing for a life partner. But through his psychiatric examination, it was found that he wasn't suffering from any sort of severe mental illness. It was revealed during this trial that Martin had begun to build this bunker 5 years prior to the kidnapping. The walls were made of 30-centimeter thick concrete, and the bunker itself was 60 square meters underground. During the search of the bunker and the home, investigators actually found a contract that was made by Martin for Isabel with a list of demands. They had found on his computer that this included things such as the girlfriend experience, which was French kissing during sex, as well as acts that the victim could perform on him in order to have her sentence in the bunker reduced. There were demands to shave her body hair, to get a tan, and to pierce her navel. In the contract, his sentence would also be extended if she tried to escape, if she refused sex, or if she was caught herself. This contract was for a 10-year period. And also on this computer, they found violent, explicit videos, as well as evidence that he'd been stalking at least 10 other women. He also had taken the swabs of the DNA and the blood that he had taken from Isabel to the clinic where he worked and logged them as an unidentified refugee. Psychologist Stefan Krakowski explained that Martin was a determined, high-functioning, goal-oriented person who achieved most of the goals that he set in his life. That the kidnapping was basically just another one of these goals. Isabel's lawyer said that although she didn't suffer serious physical injuries during the abduction, that she was deeply traumatized. She had nightmares, PTSD, flashbacks, and she was demanding $63,000 in damages. Now, although Martin was being charged with aggravated rape and kidnapping, the court found insufficient evidence to prove aggravated rape, and Martin was actually acquitted of that charge. Now, since juries were not actually used in Sweden, the judge sentenced him to 10 years for the kidnapping and ordered him to pay $21,000 to the victim. Though, on his appeal, his sentence was reduced to 8 years due to mitigating factors such as him possibly having this psychological disorder. He was claiming to be depressed and was suffering from suicide thoughts. So 8 years for this kidnapping. In the media, this doctor became known as the bunker doctor, or the next Josef Fritzl of Austria, the father who was found to have kept his own daughter locked in his basement for 24 years and forced her to have his children. Now, Elizabeth Fritzl was actually found in 2008. Her father was sentenced to life, and that is a wild one that I have gone into depth with in another video, so I will link that down below if you would like to watch that. But Martin Trenneborg is said to be the Josef Fritzl of Sweden. But years later, Isabel would actually return to the bunker that she escaped from to process what had happened. She had wanted to tell her story, to be free from all of these memories, so she decided to do a documentary called The Bunker. Since the kidnapping and the escape, Isabel had actually struggled to come to terms with what had happened. She still felt like she was trapped in that bunker. The PTSD was overwhelming to her. She had to take sleeping pills in order to fall asleep, but that didn't stop her from waking up in a panic, not knowing where she was most nights. Work was impossible for her after this. She could not do anything to support herself. And she spoke about how sometimes it was easy to deal with what had happened. She would just repress the memories. But other times it was absolutely crippling. And she would take this medicine so she didn't fall into a depression. But it would also disconnect her from all of her feelings.
Så säger han att han har kidnappat mig och att han tänker ha mig inlåst i ett par år. Han berättar att han har byggt det helt själv och ja, han berättar väldigt i detalj så hur han har byggt bunkern. Nästan som att han är stolt över hur han har byggt den. Jag får komma ut vid några tillfällen för han har byggt som en rastgård.
Upplevde du han som svängig i humöret?
Ja, för han var lugn hela tiden och samtidigt som han var hotfull vid vissa tillfällen. Så han ger mig pistolen och säger att dörrarna är öppna, att det bara är att skjuta han och gå därifrån. Men jag känner att jag skulle inte kunna skjuta någon. Och jag visste inte ens om dörrarna var öppna, som han sa.
Förklarar han varför? Att han vill du ska skjuta? Är han deprimerad eller vad?
Ja, och på fredagen där så säger han att han skulle inte klara av att sitta i fängelse. Men det visade sig att pistolen var ju inte riktig, utan det var ju ett test för att testa mina intentioner. Så det var ju väldigt tur att jag inte tryckte av pistolen. Han sa bland annat att han trodde inte att jag skulle vara så snäll som jag var. Och han sa att om jag inte hade varit så snäll så hade han nog inte släppt mig, utan då hade jag förtjänat att vara kvar där.
När kände du dig fri?
Det var när jag kom in i ett rum och jag skulle prata med utredare. Det var först då som jag...
Och han fick inte vara med?
Nej.
She was saying that she couldn't even trust herself anymore with all of her triggers. She would avoid fridges and hearing them run because it would instantly place her back into that bunker. And in this documentary, Isabel requested the preliminary investigation material from police in her case. And so upon looking at these photos, she began to remember more. She even went to the police museum to look and touch at the evidence that had been collected. And this actually brought her to tears. Those masks that Martin Trenneborg had used were there. She could hold them, and it made her have all of those feelings rush back. But then she decided that she was going to do some exposure therapy. She was working really hard with a trauma therapist. And so they actually built a reconstruction of the bunker. And for the first time since escaping, Isabel would enter. And she said that the door was like the entrance to hell. While there, she actually remembered a time where Martin was hanging a new light in the bunker and asked her to hold the electric drill. She was thinking about attacking him with this, and that is when he would tell her that if she did, she would be left with his body and would still be trapped there. But after so much therapy and exposure therapy, and working on herself through these years, and even though she still suffers and struggles so much, when she was asked if she felt like a survivor, she said she did. She also spoke about how after her escape, Nellie, who had been with her this whole time, was fiercely protective of Isabel, barking at anyone who came close to her, and that soon after they escaped, Nellie actually passed away. She had lived with her mother through that kidnapping, and most likely was there to support her during that traumatic time. But when Isabel was in this bunker, she actually said she felt strong after visiting and knowing that she could handle it once again. She no longer works as an escort, and she's realized that there is so much more important to life than luxurious things. She said that she prioritizes real relationships and not living a double life. In 2018, she wrote her book, You Are Mine, Drugged and Held in a Secret Bunker. This is my true story of escape, which I will have linked for you down below.
Har jag fått en helt annan syn på livet och helt andra värderingar.
Vad slags hjälp har du fått?
Jag går fortfarande i terapi, och bearbetar det som har hänt. Jag insåg vad som var viktigt i livet. Så innan så hade det varit stora, snabba pengar och mycket resor som jag tyckte var bra då, men jag fick helt andra värderingar efter det, och jag var ganska orädd och äventyrslysten innan, men nu så har jag blivit mer rädd och avvaktande som person.
Nå sitter inne, slipper ju ut en dag. Vad tänker du om det?
Jag är jätterädd sen när han kommer ut. Jag lever ju under skyddad identitet och kommer nog fortsätta att få göra det ganska länge.
But in August of 2023, Isabel would receive a letter saying that her captor had been released. He had served all of his 8 years. She was terrified at first, but then she thought, he has taken so much from me already. I'm not going to let him take away my sense of safety, peace, and happiness. The bunker doctor is now a free man. He would be about 48 years old today, and I could not find anything about his whereabouts or life after release. Isabel told People magazine, everyone has so much strength in themselves, maybe more than they realize. And I thought that was just a beautiful way to conclude her story, and it's so incredibly inspirational. But a question many people have is, why did Martin go to the police station with Isabel and stay after she was taken back alone and knew that most likely she would give him up? Did he really trust that she would lie for him? Did he want to get caught? Many believe that Isabel was not his first victim and definitely was not going to be his last. So now that he's released, do you think we'll hear about him in the news again? Will another bunker be built? Why in the world would anyone think that it was a good idea to release this man? Is a short sentence something that in Sweden is just very normal? If you live there or know anything, please let us know in the comments below, because 8 years and then actually released is baffling to me after essentially admitting that he was still going to do this to other women, and he had lots of plans to do so. You guys know my passion for survivor stories. I have a whole playlist I will link down below if you would like to watch. And I'm just so proud of Isabel, and especially in her documentary, everything she has overcome, and the fact that she wants to get better and not let this man completely ruin the rest of her life. It is just so incredibly beautiful. I am so proud of her. I want to support her in every way possible, and I just hope that you guys can leave her some very, very uplifting and positive comments, because she is doing a wonderful job at healing from the horror she was put through. So don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces.